I never imagined the two people I trusted most, my husband and my mother, could betray me like this. One night, I woke to hear whispers in the hallway. Curious, I got up, only to find them standing too close, their conversation abruptly stopping as I approached. My mother's expression was nervous, while my husband avoided my gaze entirely. My heart raced, disbelief washing over me. What were they hiding from me? When I married Daniel, I thought I had found my perfect partner. He was dependable, thoughtful, and had a quiet strength that made me feel secure. Over the years, our marriage settled into a comfortable rhythm. We worked hard, shared laughs, and leaned on each other during tough times. But like all relationships, ours wasn't without its challenges. One of those challenges was my mother, Linda. She had been my rock ever since my father passed away years ago. Linda was vibrant and outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into any room and command attention. But after my dad's death, she leaned on me emotionally, and in turn, I leaned on Daniel to help support her. When she started staying overnight at our home after dinners or family gatherings, I didn't think much of it. To me, it felt natural. Daniel, however, didn't share my perspective. I could sense his discomfort when she was around, though he rarely said it outright. It was in the subtle things, the way his jaw tightened when she made an offhand comment, or the forced smile he wore when she insisted on lingering in the kitchen to help clean up. One evening, he finally voiced his frustration. "Amanda, I love your mom, but doesn't she stay over a little too often? This is our home. I need my space." I didn't want to dismiss his feelings, but I also couldn't bring myself to turn my back on my mother. "She's family, Daniel," I explained. "She's lonely, and she enjoys being here with us. It's not forever." Eventually, Daniel stopped bringing it up, and I thought the issue was resolved. I had no idea that, in trying to keep the peace, I was overlooking something far more serious brewing between the two of them. It started with small things I brushed off at first. I noticed Linda laughing a little too hard at Daniel's jokes, her hand occasionally brushing his arm as they spoke. I dismissed it as her being her usual friendly self. Daniel, on the other hand, seemed increasingly quiet whenever she was around, retreating into his phone or the TV. I chalked it up to his introverted nature, convincing myself there was nothing to worry about. But then came the night that shifted everything. It had been a long day, and I went to bed earlier than usual. Daniel said he wanted to stay up and finish the movie he'd started. I kissed him goodnight and climbed into bed, assuming nothing was out of the ordinary. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of creaking floorboards outside the bedroom door. At first, I thought it was Daniel heading to the bathroom. But when the noise continued, I got up to see what was going on. I stepped into the hallway, my heart skipping a beat at the sight before me. Linda and Daniel were standing just a few feet apart, their faces lit only by the faint glow of the kitchen light. My mother wore a short nightgown I hadn't seen her wear before, and Daniel's posture was stiff, his eyes darting away the moment he saw me. "What are you two doing?" I asked, my voice thick with confusion. Linda was the first to speak, her tone flustered but quick. "Oh, I just couldn't sleep and thought I'd get some water." Daniel was passing by, and we bumped into each other. "Nothing more." Daniel nodded, his response barely audible. "Yeah, just a coincidence." I wanted to believe them. I needed to believe them. But something about the way they looked at each other, the tension in their expressions, made my stomach churn. The explanation felt rehearsed, too clean for a situation so clearly uncomfortable. I forced a smile, nodded, and returned to bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I lay awake, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. Was I overreacting? Was this really as innocent as they made it seem? Or was there something happening between them that I was too blind, or too afraid, to see? The next morning, I tried to shake the unease that clung to me like a shadow. Linda acted as though nothing had happened, chatting away over breakfast, while Daniel kept his head down, barely speaking a word. I wanted to ask him about it, to demand an explanation, but I couldn't bring myself to. What if I was wrong? What if I was reading too much into a harmless situation? But as the days passed, the unease only grew. I began noticing things I hadn't before, the way Linda's laughter seemed forced when I was around, or the way Daniel avoided my eyes whenever she entered the room. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. And soon, the truth would come out in a way I never expected. After that night in the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I told myself over and over that it was all in my head, that my mother and Daniel couldn't possibly be hiding anything from me. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I noticed things that didn't add up. It started with the subtle changes in their behavior. Daniel became more withdrawn, spending long hours in his study or glued to the TV. He wasn't his usual self. He was quieter, more distant, and avoided long conversations. When I'd ask if something was bothering him, he'd shake his head and force a smile. Just work stress, he'd say, but I knew better. After years of marriage, I could read him like a book. Linda, on the other hand, seemed unusually cheerful. She hummed as she moved around the house, her presence more confident than ever. She began lingering in the kitchen longer than necessary whenever Daniel was nearby, laughing at his dry humor in a way that felt off. It wasn't just her actions, it was the way she carried herself, as if she held a secret that gave her a newfound sense of power. I started paying closer attention, and the more I did, the more suspicious I became. One evening, as I sat in the living room folding laundry, I heard muffled voices coming from the kitchen. I recognized their tones, Daniel's low and measured, Linda's light and teasing, but I couldn't make out their words. I crept closer, staying out of sight, my heart pounding in my chest. What I heard wasn't incriminating, but it was strange. Linda was laughing softly, and Daniel's voice carried a nervous edge I hadn't heard before. When I finally walked in, they both fell silent. Linda turned to the sink, pretending to rinse a glass, while Daniel busied himself with his phone. The air between them was heavy, and I couldn't ignore the tension that lingered long after the conversation had ended. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," Linda said, flashing me a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Daniel muttered something about checking his emails and left the room without another word. That night, as I lay in bed beside Daniel, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions I didn't dare voice. Was I overreacting? Was I letting my imagination run wild? Or was there something real happening between them? Something they were desperately trying to hide? The next few weeks felt like walking a tightrope. Every glance between Daniel and Linda felt like a secret exchanged. Every laugh, every quiet moment they shared when they thought I wasn't looking, added another layer to my unease. I tried to confront Daniel once, asking him outright if everything was okay between him and my mother. He looked at me, startled, and then frowned. "What kind of question is that? She's your mom, Amanda. Of course everything's fine." But the way he said it, too quickly, too dismissively, only fueled my doubts. One evening, I decided to test my instincts. Linda was staying over again, and Daniel had stayed up late to watch TV, as he often did. I pretended to go to bed, but left the bedroom door slightly ajar. I waited in silence, my heart racing as I listened for any sound. Sure enough, after about an hour, I heard the creak of the floorboards outside the guest room. I tiptoed out into the hallway and froze when I saw them. Daniel and Linda were standing close, their voices hushed. Linda reached out and lightly touched his arm, and Daniel didn't pull away. They didn't see me at first, but when I stepped closer, Linda's hand dropped, and they both turned to me, their expressions a mix of surprise and guilt. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Nothing," Daniel said quickly. "We were just talking." "At midnight?" I pressed, my eyes darting between the two of them. Linda forced a laugh, brushing past me. "I couldn't sleep," she said, her tone airy. "Daniel was just keeping me company." "Good night, dear." I stared after her, my stomach twisting into knots. Daniel didn't say another word, just mumbled an excuse and followed her down the hallway, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. The doubts I had been pushing down for weeks now felt impossible to ignore. From that moment on, I couldn't look at either of them the same way. My mother, my husband, the two people I trusted most in the world, were hiding something from me. I could feel it in every interaction, every stolen glance, every word left unsaid. But the truth, when it finally came out, was far worse than anything I had imagined. After that night, the tension in the house became unbearable. Every moment felt like a test, every interaction a puzzle I couldn't solve. I watched Linda and Daniel more closely than ever, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't catch them doing anything outright inappropriate. Instead, it was the subtle things that haunted me. The way Linda's laughter seemed warmer when Daniel was around, or how his gaze would linger on her just a fraction too long. I hated myself for doubting them. These were the two people I loved most, the people who had been my anchors through life's storms. But no matter how hard I tried to dismiss my suspicions, they only grew stronger. One evening, I decided to confront Linda. I caught her in the kitchen after dinner, leaning casually against the counter as she sipped her tea. She looked up when I entered, her face lighting up with a smile that only deepened my unease. "Mom, can we talk?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Of course, dear," she replied, setting her cup down. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated, searching her face for any sign of guilt. "Is everything okay between you and Daniel?" Her expression didn't falter, but her eyes darkened slightly, as though she'd been expecting the question. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" "I don't know," I admitted, feeling my cheeks flush. I've noticed you two seem closer lately. Is there something I should know?" Linda stepped closer, placing a hand on my arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, but it didn't ease the knot in my chest. "Amanda, you're imagining things. Daniel and I get along well because we both love you. That's all there is to it." Her reassurance should have calmed me, but it didn't. If anything, it made me feel worse. Her words were too perfect, her tone too measured, as though she'd rehearsed the answer. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind racing. Daniel slept soundly beside me, his face peaceful in the dim light. I wanted to believe him, to trust him the way I always had. But the doubt was like a poison, seeping into every thought, every moment. And then, as if my thoughts had conjured her, I heard the faint creak of the floorboards outside our room. My breath caught in my throat as I slipped out of bed and crept to the door. Peering into the hallway, I saw Linda's figure disappearing into the living room. My heart pounded as I followed, my bare feet silent against the floor. When I reached the doorway, I froze. Linda was sitting on the couch, her posture relaxed, her gaze fixed on Daniel, who stood in front of her. He looked uncomfortable, his hands stuffed into his pockets. But he wasn't pulling away as she reached out and lightly touched his arm. "Linda," I said, my voice sharp. They both turned to me, their expressions a mixture of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite name. Linda recovered quickly, flashing me a bright smile. "Oh, Amanda. I couldn't sleep, so I came out here. Daniel was just checking on me." I looked at Daniel, my chest tight with anger and fear. "Is that true?" "Yes," he said, his voice too quick, too defensive. I heard a noise and wanted to make sure everything was okay. I stared at them, my stomach churning. I wanted to scream, to demand the truth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I turned and walked away, feeling their eyes on my back as I headed to the bedroom. The next morning, I decided to test their boundaries. I told Linda I was going out to run errands and might be gone for a few hours. Her expression didn't change, but I noticed the slight lift of her eyebrows, as if she were suppressing a reaction. I drove around aimlessly for about 20 minutes before turning back toward the house. Parking a little farther down the street, I walked back quietly, my heart pounding. The blinds were drawn in the living room, but the faint sound of laughter reached my ears as I approached the front door. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable, intimate, almost playful. I unlocked the door slowly, trying not to make a sound, and stepped inside. The laughter stopped abruptly. When I entered the living room, I found them sitting on opposite ends of the couch, their postures stiff, their smiles forced. "You're back early," Linda said, her voice unnaturally bright. "I forgot something," I replied, my eyes darting between the two of them. They were trying too hard to act normal, and it only confirmed my worst fears. That night, I confronted Daniel. "I know something is going on between you and my mother," I said, my voice trembling. "Don't lie to me." He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock, but he said nothing. His silence was all the confirmation I needed. The confrontation I had dreaded for weeks finally came to a head. That night, I couldn't contain my suspicions any longer. The silence between Daniel and me as we lay in bed was deafening, each unspoken word weighing heavier than the last. I turned to face him, my voice barely above a whisper. "Daniel," I began, my heart pounding, "I need you to tell me the truth. What's going on between you and my mother?" His body stiffened, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. For a moment, I thought he might deny it, brush it off as he had so many times before. But when he finally turned to look at me, his expression was one of guilt and defeat. "There's nothing going on," he said, his voice strained, "but things have been complicated." "Complicated how?" I demanded, sitting up. My voice was shaking, but I refused to let him see the tears threatening to fall. "Don't lie to me, Daniel. I saw the way she looked at you, the way you looked at her. You're hiding something, and I want to know what it is." He sat up too, running a hand through his hair as he avoided my gaze. "I didn't want to tell you because I knew how much it would hurt you. Your mother, she's been acting inappropriately. She's been crossing boundaries." I stared at him, my mind racing. "And what about you? Did you cross those boundaries too?" His silence was deafening. The look on his face said everything I didn't want to hear. I felt my stomach drop, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the realization hit me. You did, I whispered, my voice breaking. Didn't you? It wasn't like that, he said quickly, reaching for my hand. I pulled away, the touch of his skin suddenly unbearable. She came onto me. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, Amanda. I didn't know how to handle it. I let out a bitter laugh, tears streaming down my face. So you thought the best way to handle it was to let it happen? To betray me with my own mother? It wasn't intentional, he insisted, his voice desperate. It just happened. I got out of bed, pacing the room as I tried to make sense of his words. How long? I demanded. How long has this been going on? He hesitated, and the pause was enough to make my heart shatter. A few weeks, he admitted finally. But it didn't mean anything, Amanda. I swear to you, it didn't mean anything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The man I had trusted, the man I had built my life with, had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And my own mother, how could she do this to me? How could she cross a line so sacred? I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in the living room, staring at the walls as the hours ticked by. The weight of their betrayal was crushing, and I felt as though my entire world had crumbled beneath me. The next morning, I decided I couldn't face Linda. I sent her a text, telling her not to come over for a while. Her reply was brief, but it stung all the same. I understand. It was as though she knew the truth had come out, and she didn't bother to deny it. Daniel tried to talk to me, to apologize, but I couldn't bear to look at him. I need space, I told him, my voice hollow. I need time to think. For days, I walked around in a fog, my emotions swinging wildly between anger, sadness, and disbelief. How could I ever trust him again? How could I look at my mother without feeling the sting of her betrayal? The two people who were supposed to love me the most had shattered me, and I didn't know if I could ever recover. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to piece together the courage to confront Linda. I invited her over one evening, the tension between us palpable as she sat across from me in the living room. I know, I said simply, my voice cold. I know what happened between you and Daniel. Her face fell, her confident demeanor crumbling in an instant. Amanda, Don't, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Don't try to explain it away. I want to know why. Why would you do this to me? How could you betray me like this? She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said softly. It was a mistake, Amanda. A terrible mistake. A mistake, I repeated, my voice rising. You call sleeping with my husband a mistake? Her tears spilled over, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was lonely, she admitted. After your father died, I felt empty. And Daniel, he was kind to me. He made me feel wanted again. And you didn't think about what that would do to me? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. You didn't think about how it would destroy me to know that my husband and my mother had betrayed me? I'm sorry, she whispered, but the words felt hollow. I stood up, unable to sit across from her any longer. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice breaking. Either of you. She didn't try to stop me as I left the room. I went upstairs, shutting the door behind me as I tried to hold myself together. My life had been turned upside down, and I didn't know if it would ever feel normal again. But one thing was clear, I couldn't let this betrayal define me. I had to find a way to move forward, even if it meant leaving behind the people who had hurt me most. The days following my confrontation with Daniel and Linda were a blur of anger, heartbreak, and confusion. Every corner of my home felt tainted, every memory of my marriage and my relationship with my mother weighed down by their betrayal. I couldn't look at Daniel without feeling sick, and Linda's attempts to contact me were met with silence. I wasn't ready to face either of them, not after what they'd done. Daniel tried his best to mend things. He left notes on the kitchen counter, small apologies scribbled on pieces of paper. I'm sorry, Amanda. Please talk to me. I'll do anything to fix this. But his words felt empty. How could he fix something so broken? How could he undo the pain he'd caused? Linda, too, reached out, leaving voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. I would see her name flash on my phone and feel a wave of anger so strong that my hands would tremble. She was supposed to be my mother, my protector. And instead, she had become the person who hurt me most. I spent hours replaying their betrayal in my mind, trying to understand how it had come to this. I thought back to the little moments I had ignored, the laughter, the glances, the subtle shifts in their behavior. How long had I been blind to the truth? How long had I been living in a home built on lies? One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, Daniel walked in. He looked exhausted, his face lined with guilt and regret. Amanda, he said softly, sitting down across from me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need to say this. I didn't respond, but I didn't stop him either. I hate myself for what I've done, he continued, his voice breaking. There's no excuse for it, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I love you, Amanda. I love you more than anything, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to prove that to you, if you'll let me. His words hung in the air, but they didn't bring the comfort he hoped they would. Do you even understand what you've done? I asked, my voice trembling. You didn't just betray me. You destroyed my trust, my sense of safety. How do you expect me to move past that? He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I don't know, he admitted. But I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that our marriage could survive this, that we could rebuild what had been broken. But the truth was, I didn't know if I had it in me to forgive him, or my mother. A few days later, Linda showed up at the house uninvited. I opened the door to find her standing there, her eyes red and puffy from crying. Please, Amanda, she said, her voice shaking. I just want to talk. I stepped aside, letting her in, but kept my distance as she sat on the couch. What do you want, Mom? I asked coldly. I want to apologize, she said, her hands wringing nervously in her lap. I made a terrible mistake, and I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you. Her words only fueled my anger. You didn't just make a mistake, I snapped. You betrayed me. You and Daniel both. How do you expect me to forgive you for that? Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. I don't expect anything, she said. I just need you to know how sorry I am. I was lonely, Amanda. I wasn't thinking clearly. But that doesn't excuse what I did. I know I've hurt you in a way that can never be undone. Her words softened something in me, but only slightly. I could see the pain in her eyes, the regret etched into her features. But it wasn't enough to erase what she had done. I need time, I said finally. I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom. Or Daniel. But I need space to figure out what I want, what I can handle. She nodded, wiping her tears as she stood. Take all the time you need, she said. I'll be here if you're ever ready. When she left, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. I wasn't sure if I would ever let her back into my life, but at least I had taken the first step in deciding what I needed. As the weeks went on, I began to focus on myself. I started therapy, something I had avoided for years, and found solace in talking to someone who could help me untangle my emotions. Slowly, I began to find clarity. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I was ready to start healing. Daniel stayed in the house, but our relationship remained strained. I didn't know if we could ever rebuild the trust that had been lost, but I wasn't ready to make any final decisions. For now, I was content to take things one day at a time. And as for Linda, I kept my distance. Maybe one day I would be ready to face her again, to have a relationship that wasn't clouded by betrayal. But for now, I needed to focus on myself, on picking up the pieces of my life, and finding a way forward. Months have passed since the day my world fell apart. The raw anger and despair that consumed me in the beginning have softened into something quieter, but no less painful. A sense of loss that lingers, even as I try to rebuild my life. I've learned that healing isn't a straight path. Some days I feel strong and ready to move forward. Other days, I'm overwhelmed by grief and questions that will never have satisfying answers. Daniel and I are still living under the same roof, but it's no longer the home it once was. The laughter and comfort we shared have been replaced by careful conversations and awkward silences. He's been patient, giving me space when I need it and offering support when I allow it. He keeps saying he'll do whatever it takes to earn my trust again, but I don't know if that's possible. Trust is fragile, and once it's broken, it's never the same. I've spent countless hours in therapy, unpacking the betrayal and trying to make sense of it. My therapist told me something that stuck with me. Forgiveness isn't about excusing the people who hurt you. It's about setting yourself free from the pain they caused. I don't know if I'm ready to forgive Daniel or my mother, but I do know that I don't want to carry the weight of their actions forever. It's exhausting, and I deserve better than that. As for my mother, I've kept my distance. She's reached out several times, leaving voicemails and sending letters, but I haven't responded. I'm not sure I ever will. The bond we had has been shattered, and I can't imagine a world where we go back to how things were. I loved her deeply, but she took advantage of that love in a way I'll never forget. Maybe in time, I'll find a way to let her back into my life, but not now. Not yet. One thing I've learned through all of this is that betrayal doesn't define you. It hurts, yes, and it changes you in ways you can't predict. But it doesn't take away your worth. I've spent so much time wondering what I did wrong, why I wasn't enough for the people I trusted most. But the truth is, their actions were never about me. They were about their own weaknesses, their own choices. And while that doesn't erase the pain, it helps me let go of the guilt I've been carrying. I've started focusing on myself in ways I never did before. I joined a yoga class, started journaling, and even reconnected with old friends I'd drifted away from. For the first time in years, I'm learning who I am outside of my roles as a wife and a daughter. It's liberating and terrifying all at once, but I know it's necessary. If there's one lesson I've taken from this experience, it's the importance of boundaries, setting them, respecting them, and refusing to let anyone cross them. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your self-respect or ignoring your instincts. It means standing up for yourself, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I don't know what the future holds for me and Daniel. Maybe we'll find a way to rebuild, or maybe we won't. What I do know is that I won't make decisions out of fear or obligation anymore. I'll make them for me because I deserve to be happy. To anyone who's been through something like this, know that you're not alone. Betrayal may feel like the end of the world, but it's also an opportunity to rebuild, a chance to discover just how strong you are. And if nothing else, let this be a reminder. No matter how tempting something seems, it's never worth losing the people who truly love you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Could you forgive a betrayal like this, or is it unforgivable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that will leave you questioning everything. Trust me, you won't believe what's coming next.